used to call me Crazy Joe, but now they can call me Batman.
What up? Welcome back once again to the Necro Zoo. I am Boom. And in this one, let's go ahead and add one more figure to my McFarlane DC Multiverse collection. Now today we will take a look at the Page Punchers, Ghost of Krypton's Superman. Now I've been really anticipating taking a look at this figure. He is all armored up. And although Page Punchers is released under the banner of DC Direct, it is still a product of McFarlane Toys, and it goes right alongside your DC Multiverse collection. Although this little wave of figures is kind of looks like it's going to be a thing of its own. It's really specific to comics that accompany the figures. Now we have come a long way from before we were getting the same comic with the same cover with each figure. Then we moved on to getting the same comic, but at least with a different cover that represented each character. And now we have finally graduated to getting a different comic, a different cover with each individual figure. Now this wave does consist of 4 figures, and that'll be Superman, Val-Zod, the Ghost of Zod, and Brainiac. Now some of these figures do have platinum versions. We'll talk about that later on in the video. Plus we'll give some different looks for the head from this Superman, which is a really awesome looking head sculpt. But for now, let's get into this really intriguing and interesting version of Superman. Now he does look pretty haunted in the packaging, but let's go ahead and take a closer look at him. Now first, he does come with your standard black DC Multiverse stand. Now of course, these are not really needed, but sometimes they do come in useful. He also comes with a little data file card on the front. You have an image of Superman from the comics that are produced for these figures. That is McFarlane aligning with DC Comics to publish these comics that are made specifically for the Page Punchers. Pretty cool. Now on the back you do have some information. Talks about the comic, the storyline. Now I kind of take these comics like I do the digital figures that McFarlane gives us, and that is that not a big fan of comics. I do, peruse them and take a look at them, but then basically they just go in a box. Now, it is interesting that there was some information that I saw in these comics that kind of gave me an idea of the whole story about these actual figures. So that is pretty cool that they kind of tie in everything together, but we'll hold on to that card. Now, he does come with accessories because they are removable, although they do come installed when you're looking at them in the packaging. I did remove them so we could take a look at each one separately, and then in the end we will replace them and take a look at his armored suit setup. But first you do get these, lower leg guards, sort of shin guards. Now, pretty cool. They're not exactly the same. They do have their little differences. And that's a theme that McFarlane likes to follow, where he makes a lot of things asymmetrical, which means they're not necessarily, identical. One could be a little bit different. This goes back to Spawn with that one, tree trunk boot, and then he has the one regular foot, and that makes a character asymmetrical. And I think it's really cool because it makes each figure unique, each character separating itself from other characters. But you get these cool little boot guards. You also get, this is kind of like around his waist, like a cod piece, I guess you could say. But all of these parts have some really nice, intricate sculpt work. And they do have a little bit of silver wash added to them, which is always appreciated. You have these that go on the forearms and on the fist. One's a sort of forearm guard, but it is open at the end. And then the other one is more like a bashing fist. Has a meat tenderizer, spikes on it at the end. Now, what I found in the comics is that Superman goes into the Phantom Zone. When they are in the Phantom Zone, they don't necessarily have a physical presence. So they are able to wear this armor and do damage to enemies, where otherwise they would just be, punching air. I think I think that's what I understood from it. But for me, these are just cool pieces of armor that take me back to when figures used to come with detachable pieces and were really fun in the 90s. So I'm not really interested in the storyline or anything like that. I'm more interested in how the figure looks and the playability you have with it, the options you have for figure photography and stuff like that, and displays. That's basically what I'm looking at here, which is more looking at the beauty of a figure, the presence that it has on the shelf, which is what's really important to me as a collector. Now, then you do have the big shoulder guards, the upper, apparatus that he wears around his chest and shoulders. Pretty nice. Once again, they're not identical on the pauldrons. One has a kind of alien head with horns and spikes. The other one does as well, but it doesn't have any eyes, so it gives it a different feel than the one on the left side. And of course, you have that awesome Superman shield sculpted out on the front, and even has some rivets to where they could show that they put this armor together. That is a scene shown in the comic. And it's really intricate when you look at it closely. There's like so many little portholes and vents and tubes, and just the sculpture is out of this world. Not to mention that his undersuit is also sculpted out. So you know that this was a high price mold that McFarlane had to make, which is why you see the reuse with the Valzad, because it was just easier to take everything you had to put into sculpture for one figure and get two for the price of one. That way you could get full original sculpts, which is something that I always value in a McFarlane figure, is original new sculpts. When it can be done, it is really something to admire. And finally, you get this cool breathing apparatus or face shield sort of guard. Now, when we saw the images from these figures online, this was like one of the first images we saw, was a close up of the Superman with this guard on. And from right then, I knew I was really going to want to pick this figure up. It just looked like McFarlane knocked it out of the park with the face sculpt, with the head sculpt, and even with the intricate sculpt with this face guard. And that's just another little added detail that gives the character its own unique life, and really appreciate that. But let's go ahead and take a closer look at the figure. Now, this one's kind of weird because right off the bat, first impressions, I can see the proportions are like a little bit abnormal. Not to say that's a bad thing. I have come to appreciate the sort of straight from the pages of the comics and into your hand will kind of end up giving you those weird aesthetics. But I did notice that when you have all the armor on him, you don't notice it as much as when he's just plain like this. But another thing that just pops out to me are these big frog stomper boots. They're just huge. Really crazy how big they are compared to the rest of the figure. But once again, it is something that when you look at the comics, they always have those, like, they always follow that style of the artist. And when they're drawn on the page, it doesn't always necessarily translate into figure form. But here it is in my hand, the figure from the comics. I have to say, it is really awe inspiring. All the detail they had to get into this costume. There's just tons of straps and rivets and little details like spikes on the fist that you just don't notice at first until you end up getting them in hand and you could see everything for yourself close up. But first impressions, really intimidating looking Superman. He really looks tall. We will do like a size comparison later, and you guys will be tripped out about exactly how tall he is. But crazy enough, the head really looks in proportion with the rest of the DC multiverse. Now, taking a closer look at that head sculpt, I Definitely was not let down. This is a beautiful head sculpt. One of the better Superman head sculpts that I've seen. Now, one thing that really detracts from this head sculpt is he has a giant scar, like from above his eyebrow down into his cheek. Now, in no way do I dislike this. This is actually cool. It gives a little bit of character to this version of Superman. Although I mean he heals pretty rapidly, so I don't know how the scar would be there. But as a distinctive characteristic for a figure and for a character, it is pretty sweet. Now, if you all don't know, I have my scars. I'll give you a couple. I have a pretty nice slash right here. I have a cut above right here above my brow that never, the hair didn't never grow back. So it's just like a little line right above my eyebrow. I have various other scars here on my face. I've, lived a crazy life. And as some people say, it just gives you some character. Really digging this head sculpt. Later on, we are going to try it on some other bodies to see how it looks on top of other bodies, just to give it some different alternate looks, but we'll do that later on. Let's take a look at the articulation really quickly. You do have that nice side-to-side waist swivel, tilt-a-whirl. You got a lower waist swivel, upper chest swivel, a lot of nice smooth articulation at the waist. You could twist them, get him in some cool poses. He does have a front crunch. It is there. Look at that. So that's really nice. McFarlane progressing in that front crunch articulation. And of course, you could lean him back for flying poses. Cool. Take a look at the shoulder. You got that socket and bushing shoulder joint. It moves around very well, giving you a lot of movement and range. You got some up and down. You got front to back. Awesome fully articulated shoulder movement. You got a bicep swivel, double jointed elbows that look really clean. They don't look as jagged as a lot of earlier McFarlane figures, so I like that. Moving down from the shoulder, you got all that intricate sculpt work, buckles, rivets, spikes. Pretty interesting, all the work they did to go into this costume. Of course, you have a fist on this left hand, and you got the wrist articulation from McFarlane. And on the other side, you have the same thing. Pretty cool. Dually fisted Superman. Awesome. T-pose pretty smoothly. Arms above his head. You got that beautiful Superman crest on the chest. Painted very cleanly. And it matches up with the cool belt with the shield on it, which breaks up the whole all blue suit and gives you some contrast of red and yellow. Awesome. Let's take a look at the thigh swivel. He has great movement at the thigh swivel, a lot of free range. Of course, this means that you can move his boot from side to side without having a thigh cut. Kicks up really high. Look at that. Kicks up really far as well. And do not be afraid to do this, because that is why the trunks are made of rubber, so that you can get all of this range. And when you put them back, the trunks go back to their original shape. Kick out his knee. He does have that McFarlane thigh twist. Double jointed knees. Once again, the knees look really clean. They don't look jagged at all. Straighten them out. You have up and down at the big clown shoes, right to left, rocker, and of course you have toe articulation. Big old boots, a little bit spiky too, so be careful with those. Now, before we go, let's take a look at the complete lower body. Can't talk enough about all the sculpt work that they did. There is so much detail. You could just look at this for hours and see all the different little components that make up this suit. Really rather interesting, and definitely some long legs on this guy. Take a look at him from the bottom. A slight tread and some identifying marks. Moving up the back, more of that detailed sculpt work. going into scope work, even on the trunks and into the back, which looks really great. Then you got this cape. Now, I think this was probably made before McFarlane was getting into the wired capes. And another thing is that once you put that shoulder apparatus, it kind of pushes this down. So it's really an advantage that it's, just a free flowing cloth cape, but it fits really snug. If you look at the way it locks into the back, they did a beautiful job of designing the way it's held down. And then you got the back of the hair, the back of that amazing head sculpt from McFarlane. So really happy with this figure. Great addition to the collection. But now we're going to take a look at some crazy stuff. First of all, I do want to give you like a sort of height comparison so you could get an idea of how tall this guy is. And I did tell you he looked really tall. Now I have here the Earth 2 Superman. And we know this is a taller figure. He's right up there with the Hush Batman. But as you can see here, this armored Superman really, towers over him. I think this guy is more like 8 inches tall. Now, it's not a big negative because you are going to be displaying him with his armor. And basically, if you were going to make a display, you would just display him with the rest of the Ghost of Krypton wave. But it is really unnerving just how tall he is. Look at that. I mean, he's huge, which is really crazy because his head sculpt actually fits on other figures. Now, I did want to try it on a couple of different figures just to, see what it looked like. Now, I'm a big fan of the Eradicator version of Superman, but of course, they gave us that alternate all black version. But I do think that in the future, McFarlane will be releasing the original Eradicator. But I wanted to try this head on that body and even give him a little bit of yellow visor, goggles, glasses to really complete that Eradicator look. And it works out really well. It looks great. I mean, if you could look past the scar, which is not, the way Eradicator looked, this head sculpt just is really amazing. It's really surprising how great it looks on that Eradicator body. Now, I also have a custom Superman from Death Metal that I've been working on over time. Never really finished it, but I've done a lot to it. Painted the eyes, lifted up the head sculpt. But I just wanted to check out what it might look like with this head sculpt. So he has that scar, which gives him a little bit of a tough guy aura. And yeah, it looks pretty good. I'm going to say I love it more than the original Danzig looking head sculpt, but this one looks great as well. Now, I'm also a big fan of the Justice Lord Superman that they gave us. Now, I did make my own tweaks to this version. Really happy the way it came out. Love the head sculpt on this guy. But I did want to see what it would look like with this rough life living Superman's head sculpt on him. And once again, this head sculpt looks awesome on that Justice Lord body. I'm not going to go crazy and buy a bunch of these armored Superman just so I could get the head and transplant it onto these bodies. But I do have to say that for figure photography and for displaying it sometimes, it is very tempting. So those are just some alternate looks that you could have with this Superman. Now, before we go, let's go ahead and put his armor on him and get a full look of, look at him in his full glory. All right, so there we go. Now, I do want to say there is a couple of different options of the way you could display him. You could mix match, with the armor parts. Really fun to play around with them. Take off maybe the shield on the face and have him just with the open head sculpt. Now, even with the armor, you can crouch him down and get him in some cool poses and even add some accessories just to give him a little bit more ambiance while posing and taking photography. So I'm really happy with this guy. Was really worth the wait to finally take a closer look at him. and see him in his full glory with all of his armor on, with that cool cloth cape in the back. I really like the way it drapes down with the shoulder pauldrons and the shoulder guard, all together making a really awesome looking alternate Superman with armor. Once again, as I always say, this is something that will catch somebody's attention. You know, what is that? It's Superman, I could tell, but what's going on with all that added armor? Pretty cool. Even the pauldrons are articulated where you can manipulate them and move them around to some different positions that you would want to do. Now, I do have the comics. You know, like I say, this is just something pretty nice from McFarlane, but I don't, get into comics that much anymore, so those will just be put away. But I do have one other Superman in the box, which I'm just gonna hold on to. Not really sure if I want to go through and do a wash. Now, I have seen images of where people have done washes on this guy. It really brings out the beauty of the sculpt work and the detail. So that's a way you could go by giving this figure just a dark wash to take it from being a $20 figure and being something extra special on your shelf. I also have the Valzad. Now, what I have heard about this one is people are right away saying that, oh, well, the head sculpt fits on, the Rebirth Superman body, and you could just repaint it and make the Valzad, without this armor. But trust me, I know McFarlane is going to release a regular suited, Valzad. Do I think he'll use this head sculpt and this chest emblem? Maybe. But if you want to, take off the head, take off the shield, put them on an infected Superman body and just repaint it and make your own Valzad, go ahead, But I'm going to hold off. I feel like it's just inevitable, especially because he knows the character exists. He's going to make a regular comic version of Valzad. It's, almost a for sure thing. And while I do have the ghost, the ghost of Zod figure, this is one, it's just like a creepy, kooky looking figure. Now, I did talk about how there is platinums, a platinum of the Valzad where he has the same armor as Superman, just in a different purple color scheme. They didn't make a platinum for this, zombie Zod. But if you look in the comics, there is images of him normal, and he looks really good. I really wish they would have made a platinum of just a normal Zod. Maybe it'll come out later on. You never know. But I think it was a really cool design for Zod that they could have used to do a platinum version of this, you know, ghost zombie Zod. Now, I'm not going to review this one. I will open it and take a look at it and add it to the shelf. This one does come with some alternate hands and looks pretty cool, but I'll just, add him to the shelf. And finally, let's talk about the Brainiac. Now, I have one in box, but I also have one that I already opened. And I even have two more on the way from another site. So that's going to be four. Now, my goal is to have five of these. And another thing you find out when you look in the comics is that these are really the drones of Brainiac. And the platinum version that they made is the actual Brainiac. Everybody was correct in saying that these were more like army builders, like soldiers, drones, if you will. And the other version of Brainiac is the real Brainiac. So I'm gonna get as many as of of these, which for me five's good, maybe six, just depending on if I come across it, and or maybe eventually they'll make a sale, and that's where you could really pick up a lot of these. But I do want to have at least four or five of these drones, and I'll eventually look for a platinum of the Brainiac to be their, leader, which kind of opens up the display where you won't just have the Superman and the Valzad and the Ghost, the army of drones and Brainiac. So I think that's pretty awesome and cool to display on your shelf. And this figure is no, it's not nothing small. This is another one that just look at this interesting, intricate design. Look at all the little connectors, the little appendages that it has, little little hands, a blade, and this means that you can mix and match with your other ones to make each drone a little bit different. That's what I'm gonna do. Pretty cool articulation as well, which is more like an insectoid or arachnoid version of a Brainiac. But these are so much fun nonetheless, especially to build a little army of them. But once again, if you take a detailed look at these, they just have so much scope work and so much design. Oof, it's hard not to appreciate this original design and original sculpt that we're getting basically for 20 bucks because, $5 for the comic, which, I guess, but the real prize, the real deal are the figures. So pretty happy with this one. I'm glad to add it to the collection. Hope you guys are able to pick these up if you like them. If you want to skip on them, that's also no biggie. I'm sure there's collectors that are looking forward to adding these to the collection. But you guys keep hunting out there, keep collecting, keep customizing, and I will see you on the next one.
They used to call me Crazy Joe, but now they can call me Batman.
These comics that are made specifically for the page punchers, pretty cool.